first look at newly released body camera video showing police responding to the home of actor Gene Hackman.
On February 26, 2025, federal vehicles arrived at Gene Hackman's estate in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
All going there.
So we ran around the whole property. It's huge. It's a big property.
Okay.
After no one had seen or heard from the 95-year-old actor or his wife for days.
A cloud of suspicion surrounds the deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife.
Deputies forced their way through locked gates expecting a tragedy, but what they found went far beyond that. Do you believe what they discovered inside was real or just a rumor? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments. The deaths: Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead inside the estate. The official timeline established by the investigation placed Betsy's death approximately 1 week before Gene's. Her cause was attributed to a severe viral illness. Gene's cause was listed as heart failure. Both deaths, taken individually, were explainable in the way that the deaths of elderly people often are, by the ordinary failures of aging bodies under biological stress. The gap between the two deaths is the detail that does not settle. Gene Hackman was alive for approximately 7 days after his wife died in the same house. 7 days in which he made no calls for help, reached out to no one, contacted no emergency services, and apparently remained inside the estate in complete isolation with his wife's body. The explanation offered was that his severe hearing loss meant he was unaware she had died in another part of the house. That explanation is possible. It is also the kind of explanation that raises as many questions as it resolves about the layout of the house, about daily routines between two people living together, about the basic rhythms of shared domestic life that tend to make the absence of another person detectable even when communication is limited. The physical details found inside the estate complicated the picture further. A safe was open. The library showed signs of disturbance, as if items had been moved or searched. Security cameras covering parts of the property had been disabled. The official determination was that there was no evidence of foul play. The simultaneous ordering of a full forensic search of the property was the kind of response that does not typically accompany a straightforward conclusion. Investigators do not commit the resources of a full forensic examination to a scene they are confident requires no further examination. Body camera footage from deputies who entered the property showed evidence of movement through the house that required explanation. The estate, as those deputies moved through it, did not present as a location where two elderly people had died of natural causes and been undisturbed since. It presented as a location where something had happened that the physical environment was not fully accounting for. The official story was tidy. The physical evidence it was built on was not. The estate. To understand why the discovery that followed drew the attention it did, you have to understand what kind of property the Hackman estate in Santa Fe actually was. The perimeter was secured by walls substantial enough to require genuine effort to breach, paired with motion sensors and a camera system that covered the grounds in overlapping fields. The staff who worked there were carefully selected and operated under non-disclosure agreements. The kind of legal arrangement that is standard for high-profile individuals protecting their privacy, and unusual enough in a domestic residential context to be worth noting. The combination of physical barriers, electronic monitoring, and legally enforced staff silence described a property that had been designed with security considerations that went beyond the normal requirements of celebrity privacy. Inside, the house contained antique furniture and rare artwork arranged with the kind of deliberate care that suggests curation rather than accumulation. The garden contained specimens that horticulturalists, who were later consulted, described as unusual for the region. Plants that required specific conditions to survive at altitude and that represented either significant expertise or significant expense to maintain. Deputies who walked through the property in the initial hours after entry described it to colleagues in terms that recurred consistently across accounts. One phrase appeared repeatedly: a museum protected by military logic. The security was not the security of a man protecting his fame. It was the security of a man protecting something specific. Whether that something was personal privacy, valuable property, or something with no obvious category was a question that the estate's interior had not yet answered when the initial investigation began. The answer was located in a part of the property that the initial walkthrough had not yet reached. The library was where the walkthrough changed character entirely. The hidden entrance. There is a version of a hidden passage that exists in popular imagination, built on decades of fiction and film. A bookcase swings open when the right book is pulled. The pas de deux mechanism is theatrical, designed to be eventually discovered, part of the architecture of a space that knows it contains a secret and has built the revelation of that secret into its own structure. What investigators found inside the Hackman library was not that version. The entrance was engineered for invisibility in a way that the theatrical version specifically avoids. It required a specific sequence of actions to open rather than a single dramatic trigger, a combination of steps that would produce nothing if performed in the wrong order or with any element missing. The result, when the correct sequence was completed, was an opening in the library wall that had no visible seam when closed, no gap, no tell. It was not hidden behind shelves. It was hidden inside the architecture itself. Beyond the opening was a narrow stone passage that descended steeply. No lighting, no airflow. The temperature dropped as investigators moved down, and the quality of the air changed in a way that those present later described as notable enough to mention a shift from the dry warmth of the house above to something damp and metallic and cold that arrived with the feeling of moving into a space that had been sealed from the conditions above for a considerable period. The walls of the passage were not bare stone. They were covered in deliberate markings, carvings executed with enough care and consistency to be clearly intentional rather than incidental. The markings fell into recognizable categories for the investigators who examined them closely enough. Alchemical symbols, the kind of notation used in pre-modern chemistry and metallurgy to represent materials, processes, and transformations. Technical diagrams that appeared to represent mechanical systems or structural configurations. Schematics that had the visual language of engineering drawings without immediately resolving into identifiable devices. The passage itself presented a construction anomaly that became significant when the full picture of the underground space began to develop. The upper section of the passage, the portion nearest the library entrance, showed evidence of modern construction work. Reinforced materials, methods consistent with mid-20th century or later building practice. The lower section was different in a way that went beyond style or preference. The stone in the lower section had been worked by hand, using tools and techniques consistent with construction that predated the upper section by a significant margin. How significant a margin was a question that would require specialist analysis to answer, and that analysis was already becoming one of many things investigators were quietly adding to an expanding list. The passage descended into something that nobody on the initial entry team had been expecting to find beneath a private residence in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The underground chamber. The chamber at the base of the passage was expansive, large enough to qualify as a substantial underground space by any ordinary measure. Its dimensions were such that the initial entry team had to move cautiously, taking time to understand its scale and layout before they could begin any serious assessment of its contents. The air was still, heavy with the scent of decay and age, as if the chamber itself had been waiting untouched for decades. Much of what it contained had long outlasted the structures meant to hold it. Wooden crates, once sturdy, had collapsed under their own weight in the slow, relentless effects of moisture and time. Their contents, scattered fragments of documents, photographs, and objects, were intermingled with splintered wood, creating a chaotic layer that complicated initial examination. Only a methodical, careful approach could begin to untangle the remnants, ruling out hasty or superficial conclusions. Documents were the most immediately legible category. Bound files bore partial burn marks, evidence of an interrupted attempt to destroy them, leaving coded references in systems unfamiliar to standard ciphers. Many bore insignias and letterheads from organizations that had been formally dissolved, in some cases decades earlier, suggesting secrecy, obsolescence, or both. Sepia-toned photographs offered glimpses of a distant past. Indoor spaces without windows, possibly subterranean or purpose-built, framed groups of people in meeting-like configurations, entirely unnamed and unidentifiable. One photograph carried a 1937 date on its reverse side with a single word beneath it, recorded but withheld from public knowledge. The stone floor was engraved with large circular patterns, precise enough to indicate careful tool selection. Astronomical symbols, constellation configurations, and planetary markers suggested dates that specialists were beginning to decode. Among the chamber's most perplexing elements were mechanical devices. Tools of familiar forms lacked any maker's marks, patents, or signatures. A metal cylinder with rotating rings, joined without visible assembly, defied straightforward explanation, raising questions that would challenge materials analysts alongside those of code, stone, and history. At the far end of the chamber, set into the stone wall, was the detail that stopped the investigation's momentum and redirected its focus entirely. The iron door. It was set deep into the far wall of the chamber, flush with the stone, in a way that suggested it had been installed with the same care given to the library entrance above, engineered to fit rather than simply placed. The door itself was iron, substantial enough in thickness to be visible, even in the conditions of the chamber. It had no exterior handle, no keyhole on the visible face, no mechanism of any kind accessible from the chamber side, no lever, no latch, no combination interface, no electronic panel, no physical feature that would allow anyone standing in the chamber to interact with it as an operable door. It had been sealed from the inside. The distinction between a door locked from outside and a door sealed from inside is not a technical detail. It is the difference between two entirely different purposes. A door locked from outside is designed to prevent entry. It is a barrier against something or someone approaching from without. A door sealed from inside is designed to prevent exit. It is containment. Whatever is on the other side of an interior seal is either something that cannot be allowed out, or something that chose to prevent its own exit, or something that sealed the door behind it as it went in and had another way back. Investigators examining the door found that the seal was not a simple lock or bolt thrown from inside. The door had been welded and fused along its frame, the kind of permanent closure that is not designed to be reopened and that requires significant specialized equipment and deliberate effort to achieve. This was not a door that had been closed and latched. It was a door that had been closed and then made permanent from the inside at a point that could not be determined from external examination. Authorities have disclosed almost nothing about what lies beyond it. The investigation's treatment of the iron door and whatever exists on its other side has been notably different from its treatment of the chamber's other contents. The documents and artifacts have been referenced in official communications, however briefly and incompletely. The iron door has been met with a silence that is its own form of information. Santa Fe's secret geography. Santa Fe, New Mexico is not a random location for an underground chamber with mid-century reinforced construction and a sealed iron door embedded in its far wall. Los Alamos is within driving distance, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, the site of the Manhattan Project's final production phase. Los Alamos National Laboratory remains one of the United States government's most significant classified research facilities. The infrastructure built to support that work during and after the Second World War extended beyond the laboratory's visible boundaries in ways that have been documented incompletely and declassified selectively across the decades. Underground facilities, communications infrastructure, protected storage, and the physical apparatus of classified government work in the region were built to survive scenarios that demanded they be both hidden and durable. The construction anomaly in the Hackman Tunnel, older hand-worked stone in the lower section, modernized reinforcement in the upper sections, and near the iron door fits a recognizable pattern. An existing older passage, discovered or inherited, updated for mid-century operational use, connected or sealed according to function rather than aesthetic or personal preference. Materials analysis, still ongoing, suggested that the reinforcement work occurred during a period consistent with Cold War infrastructure development in the region, raising questions about who commissioned it and why. Neighbors of the estate, speaking after the discovery became public, recalled details long overlooked. Low-frequency vibrations, detectable only at night when ambient noise dropped, seemed to emanate from beneath the property. Vibrations that moved through the ground rather than air, consistent with underground machinery or systems. Hackman's response when a neighbor once mentioned it had been brief and final. Some things are better left below the surface. Unmarked vehicles had appeared at the property after dark over the years, their visits sporadic and never corresponding to any visible pattern of deliveries or social calls. Former staff recalled a pervasive atmosphere of containment, extending far beyond normal expectations of discretion. One former housekeeper, speaking to a journalist, said only that she had seen things she was not meant to see and declined to provide specifics, presumably constrained by a non-disclosure agreement. A technical examination added further context. A hidden closed-circuit communication line ran from the main house directly to the underground chamber. It was isolated from external telephone and internet networks, connecting only 2 points inside the estate. Whether it had been in recent use or whether it had facilitated communication with whatever existed beyond the iron door remained uncertain. Taken together, the neighborhood reports, the construction timeline, the communication line, these details converged on a single implication. The Hackman estate tunnel was not a mere eccentricity or private curiosity. It was part of something larger, both geographically and institutionally. And the investigation, though circling the edges of this truth, had not yet disclosed the nature of that connection. Hackman's final days. People who knew Gene Hackman in his later years described him consistently in ways that contradicted the image of eccentric isolation suggested by the estate's elaborate security arrangements. Warm, routine-driven, grounded in the ordinary rhythms of domestic life in a way that genuine recluses rarely are. His withdrawal from public life was understood by those close to him as the retreat of a man who had spent decades in the most public profession imaginable and had simply decided he had done enough. That interpretation was not wrong, but it was incomplete. The logic of the security measures, staff non-disclosure agreements, disabled cameras, locked gates, and enforced silence became clearer when considered alongside what lay beneath the property. The walls were not shielding Gene Hackman, the actor, from fan intrusion. They were protecting access to something that had existed before Hackman arrived and would likely remain after he was gone. He had not created the system. The tunnel's older sections confirmed that, at some point, Hackman had been incorporated into it. Whether that incorporation was voluntary, imposed, or a mixture of both, the evidence does not fully reveal. Records from the estate indicated that the tunnel entrance had been activated shortly before Hackman's death. In whatever condition he was in during his final days, he had almost certainly descended the steep stone steps one last time. The reason for a 95-year-old man in failing health to enter cold darkness was either urgency or obligation. Something needed to be checked, retrieved, secured, or confirmed. The seal on the iron door may have been one of those things. The chamber's contents may have been another. The isolation of his final years, the legal instruments binding his staff, the property's physical security, the disabled cameras in the days before his death, and the disturbed library all point to the same conclusion. Not the protection of a private man's solitude, but the preservation of a responsibility. A responsibility passed to him or assumed by him that required a particular kind of care and produced a particular kind of silence. Whether Hackman chose that responsibility, inherited it by circumstance, or found himself unable to relinquish it, is the question the underground chamber raises and does not answer. Why the silence is louder than the deaths. Federal teams working in the chamber after the initial discovery brought in expertise that went considerably beyond what a standard investigation of a celebrity death would require. Forensics was expected. Cryptography was not. Materials analysis was expected at a general level. Specialized engineering history examination was not. Astronomical pattern analysis was not. The combination of disciplines assembled to examine the contents of the chamber described an object of investigation that the deaths of 2 elderly people in Santa Fe would not on their own have warranted. The information coming out of the investigation has been managed in a way that is itself informative. Cases connected to public figures generate leaks in proportion to the number of people involved and the level of public interest. The Hackman case combined both factors in abundance. The deaths of a 95-year-old Academy Award-winning actor and his wife with a forensic investigation, federal involvement, and an underground chamber containing century-old documents and a sealed iron door represented exactly the kind of material that tends to produce sources willing to speak to journalists in exchange for the modest satisfaction of being the person who knew something first. No significant leaks have emerged from the investigation of the chamber. The operational security around the underground discovery has been tighter than the operational security around the deaths themselves, which is an unusual inversion of normal investigative information management. Investigators protect the details most relevant to prosecution or to the integrity of an ongoing investigation. The deaths have a cause of death. The chamber has an iron door that nobody is discussing. The silence is not the silence of an investigation with nothing to report. It is the silence of an investigation that has decided, at a level above the investigators themselves, that what it has found requires careful management before it becomes public information. What was he guarding? The questions the underground chamber raises arrange themselves into two shapes that pull in opposite directions. The first is the question of legacy. Was Gene Hackman the final living caretaker of something buried before he was born, passed through a chain of custody that stretched back to the 1937 photograph and the dissolved organizations and the hand-worked stone in the tunnel's lower sections? A man who received something he did not create, maintained it across decades of his life, and descended those stairs one last time knowing he was running out of time to pass it forward? Second is the question of entrapment. Was he simply the last man left above something he had been connected to under circumstances he could not fully control, trapped by obligation or knowledge into maintaining a silence that the estate's walls and legal instruments and disabled cameras were all in service of? A man who knew what was in the chamber and behind the iron door, and had decided that knowing was its own kind of burden that could not be set down. The FBI almost certainly has a more developed answer to those questions than any external analysis can produce from the available information. The decision about how much of that answer to make public and when belongs to people operating under considerations that have nothing to do with the public's interest in understanding what lay beneath the estate of a famous actor in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The iron door is the center of that decision. Everything in the chamber, the documents, the photographs, the devices, the astronomical floor patterns points toward it. Everything the investigation has been silent about points toward it. Whatever is on the other side of a door welded shut from inside, in a chamber beneath a property connected by private communication line to a house 60 miles from Los Alamos, in a region whose classified infrastructure from the mid-20th century has never been fully accounted for publicly, is what the silence is protecting. The stone is still there, the door is still sealed, and the FBI is not saying what it found when it opened it. A sealed underground chamber beneath a private estate. Photographs dated 1937. Devices with no manufacturing signature. An iron door welded from the inside. A communication line connecting the house to the chamber. Federal investigators with expertise nobody ordered for a simple natural death. Gene Hackman kept something beneath his house that the people who found it have decided not to explain. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next.